I anticipate that this video will make a lot of people upset with me.
Well, yeah, lying to your audience will have that effect. In fact, the only reason I even know about this video in the first place is because a number of your now former fans felt like you were being deliberately vague, decided to look things up for themselves, only to be horrified by what they discovered. Bethany had violated their trust to cover up for her actions that were so bad that a number of them began immediately beating themselves up for hoping she was telling the truth. That doesn't usually happen when someone discovers something terrible about someone they'd previously enjoyed. Usually they start hunting for excuses. Though before we can delve deeper into that, I just need to give a content warning for the following topics: homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, racism, anti-Semitism, ableism, slavery, police violence, child torture, psychological torture, and suicide. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media like Twitter and Discord. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, and today we'll be talking about Stephanie Bethany's recent video, A Personal Conversation, posted to her main channel. The video is a response to criticism Bethany received in regards to her homophobia, part of which was my own response to a specifically heinous video of hers on the topic. That response is still up, by the way, so you should go watch that for additional context. Thing is, Bethany is not here to accept responsibility for her actions. She's here to rewrite things as they went down, starting by misrepresenting the reason she was criticised. So I first became aware of Stephanie Bethany whilst I was creating my Autism Acceptance Month video in 2020, and I was very impressed by how she carried herself on her main channel. Bethany has great presentation, she seemed very empathetic, and that's when I noticed she also had a Christian channel and wondered if her compassion on the topic of autism would carry over to her religious beliefs. I was hoping that maybe the intersection of autism and Christianity might result in an interesting theological perspective. Sadly, that's not what I found. Instead, I was struck in the face by this.
Homosexual acts are wrong because the Bible has said so, and also it doesn't lead to anything other than a feeling. You don't end up with a child eventually. You just have a feeling in your body. Now, I do believe it is possible for God to make a way and for you to be in a heterosexual relationship. And if it's the case that maybe you want to start a family or something like that, I believe that God can do that for you. Does that mean someone who has done that before cannot be clean and not come before God and repent and ask that He helps them to remain celibate? No, they can do that. They can always do that. Even someone who has been delivered from alcoholism. Some days they're gonna sit there and they're gonna think, you know, I really want a beer right now. Does that make them sinful? No. It just makes them a human being. Look, we shouldn't put people down. We shouldn't say, oh, it's okay to have these relations with people because it's love. I don't think we always understand the difference between love and lust. So what I just want to say is that I think that churches should open up the doors to people who are either in homosexual relationships or think they're homosexual because of attractions, and let them know, hey, homosexual acts aren't right, and you shouldn't be doing that with someone of the same sex. But I am saying that the idea of prompting people to do whatever makes them feel good and just do what they feel leads you to people who do intimate things with animals and inanimate objects and things like that. Things that are very clearly not natural and not normal and just really jacked up because you told them, if you feel it, you should do it.
All of this and more is unpacked in my original response, so if you want to see someone demolish these assertions, be sure to check out that video. But yeah, comparing same-gender attraction to alcoholism and animal rape, declaring it unclean, stating that LGBT+ folk don't understand the difference between love and lust, and that what we feel isn't real love since Bethany believes we can't have children, as well as Bethany declaring in no unclear fashion that she believes LGBT+ folk can and should be saved or cured from being LGBT+. How many of these problems did she acknowledge in her video talking about what happened? Oh right, none of them. Instead she chose to act like people were coming after her because she's Christian.
Today I want to talk to you about the biggest reason that the autism community does not like me, and that is my religious beliefs. So it is a difficult subject even for me because I have so many people that I care about and I love. But I also have a faith that doesn't exactly align with a lot of the things that the community believes and feels, and it's very difficult for me. But for me, it is like, that's my religious belief. That is what I deeply believe and sincerely believe is truth, is the Word of God. I choose to stand with whatever the Word of God says. And I know that that is something a lot of people don't want to hear.
The irony of which is, I went out of my way in my original response to note how this is merely Bethany's interpretation of certain passages. I went so far as to supply her and any Christian watching my response scriptural analysis by biblical scholars that concluded the passages, which were first translated as being about homosexuality in 1946, were actually referring to rape, pedestry, cultism, and prostitution. By the way, prostitution should not be up there either, but that's another topic for another day. Point is, Bethany's interpretation of these passages is just that, an interpretation that reflects her and the feelings she holds on the matter. The Bible is not Bethany's basis, as she asserts, it's her excuse. I mean, I come from a Dutch Catholic background on my mum's side, and none of my extended family have given me any sort of shit about the fact that I am trans and bisexual. Because Bethany's hate is not an essential part of Christianity. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot of messed up stuff in the Bible that is an essential element, but this is not one of them. However, by implying my criticism of her homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, since yes, she did mention gender identity in her original video, by implying said criticism is really an attack on her beliefs as a Christian, Bethany is implying that said queerphobia is an essential part of said religious beliefs. And it's important for me to note here that, in the same vein as the biblical scholars I offered Bethany in my response, this is something a number of Christian viewers felt compelled to comment on, noting their disagreement with Bethany. I just need to make that absolutely clear to be fair to them. Sadly, Bethany isn't quite done with her dishonesty. In trying to further sell the idea that she's being attacked for who she is rather than what she says, Bethany throws out the claim that her critics haven't even watched her content, that they're just assuming stuff about her as a Christian from the titles of her videos.
I definitely have had experience with the problem of people looking and assuming the content of my work because they just assumed they knew everything from the title.
Besides not giving her viewers very much credit, I feel like this argument makes it very difficult for her to explain my video. I mean, at no point do I state Bethany's position for her, that's just not my style. Instead, I use clips taken from her video to show exactly what she said, whilst providing timestamps so people can always check to make sure nothing has been taken out of context. That's why you always see this little black and white timer in the bottom right corner of any video I'm critiquing. It's an accessibility feature I introduced so that you, the viewer, can always check to make sure I've left out nothing of importance. That said, if Bethany feels taken out of context at any point throughout any of my videos, I implore her to show her audience the relevant context. Emphasis on the show. If she's telling the truth, then the people who are seeing my video have a right to know I've misled them about the nature of what she said, just like the people who have watched her recent video have the right to know about how she's misleading them about the nature of what I said. That's a standard I live by, as seen in the very existence of this video. Of course, all of this boils down to the narrative of Christian persecution, a phenomenon in which predominantly white allocistic Christians run around acting as if they're being discriminated against or targeted for being Christian, when the truth is they're simply no longer being given a free pass regarding their abuse of others. That's why she talks about the cult of social justice and cancel culture on her channel, the latter of which she even brings up in this video.
And cancel culture is very, very interesting in that it goes after everyone.
Quick history lesson. Cancelling, as in to be cancelled, was a phrase that developed in black circles online, specifically black Twitter, to refer to instances in which black people vocally withdrew their support from popular figures who had been outed as serial rapists or domestic abusers. White nationalists then came along and appropriated said term, transforming it into the boogeyman that is cancel culture. If you hear someone using the phrase unironically, run in the opposite direction. Not only is its usage in this manner racist by extension of its appropriative and pejorativization, but it's also a massive red flag. It all but confirms that the person using it or the person they're defending has done some heinous shit and that they are hellbent on painting the people pointing out the issue as the real problem. It is anti-accountability 101 by this point. It also got me looking into Bethany's interactions with the black community online, the findings of which I'll be discussing towards the end of the video. But for now, let's move on to discuss Bethany's claims that I slandered her.
One very slanderous video was trying to make me out to be, even saying that I would support the torture of LGBTQ plus people, which is so horrific and untrue. So just very slanderous, very awful things being said, and people were believing that. And I felt like I couldn't address it, in part because if I told you what I knew, if I told you about the people I knew who were doing the things that they were doing, that there was a very, very awful, intention behind what was going on.
This is my thumbnail from my previous video. It notes that Stephanie Bethany supports the torture of queer youth, a topic discussed in detail at the 24th minute mark in said video. So she is very clearly referencing my response to her while simultaneously acting as if she never stated the following.
Now, I do believe it is possible for God to make a way and for you to be in a heterosexual relationship. Does that mean someone who has done that before cannot be clean and not come before God and repent and ask that he helps them to remain celibate? No, they can do that. They can always do that. So what I just want to say is that I think that churches should open up the doors to people who are either in homosexual relationships or think they're homosexual because of attractions, and let them know, hey, homosexual acts aren't right, and you shouldn't be doing that with someone of the same sex.
So not only did Bethany claim that queer people could be saved or cured of their queerness, but she actually encouraged churches to lure us in with the explicit intent of saving us from our confusion. She could not be any clearer. She wants to reprogram queer people, something that homophobic bigots refer to as reparative or conversion therapy, yet psychological institutions refer to as reparative torture. Said methods rely on psychological conditioning, using a system of reward and punishment designed to encourage or discourage certain behavior to try and force the victim to act in accordance with the standards set by cis heteronormative society. Said punishments range from verbal abuse to aversion shock therapy, all of which leave deep psychological scarring. This is not something an enabled adult is going to sign up to, which is why I focused on queer youth in my original response. Because they, along with the disabled, are going to be the ones who suffer the most as a direct result of the pseudoscience Bethany has propagated via her channel. It is very easy for bigoted parents to force their children and others under their care into these programs, the results of which are disastrous. Not only do these methods not work, but they drive the percentage of LGBT+ youth who have attempted suicide in the past year from 8% to 42%. Fact is, even putting aside planned reparative torture, basic familial rejection, something that is justified on grounds that a child can choose to not be LGBT+, has long-lasting consequences. LGBT+ adults coming from homes that did not accept their queerness were found to be, quote, more than 8 times as likely to have attempted suicide, nearly 6 times as likely to report high levels of depression, and more than 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, and more than 3 times as likely to be at high risk of HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases, end quote. Hell, even attempts to just convince queer youth that they can change almost triples attempted suicide from 8% to 23%. So if a single LGBT+ youth watched Bethany's original video, that is an impact she has already had. The violence here isn't theoretical, it's active, something she's trying to whitewash. It's also something that shocked a lot of Bethany's older fans, with many of them drawing comparison between Bethany's position on advanced behavior analysis and reparative torture. Because as much as she fights to expose the horrors of ABA, and rightfully so, she's trying to justify the very same style of torture right here. And that's not a turn of phrase. ABA as a system is ripped directly from reparative torture targeted at queer folk. If you've watched Bethany's main video on ABA, a name you might recall is Ivor Lovas, who we can see Bethany introducing in this section.
Ivar Lovaas, who was considered the father of ABA. Although Skinner's and behaviorism's ideas in general can seem dehumanizing, it is actually Lovaas that contributes to most of the disdain around ABA's beginnings. On the Lovaas Center's website, Dr. Lovaas is quoted as saying, "I would like to be remembered in the tradition of other empiricists and educators who put a good deal of faith in the power of the environment to shape human behavior. I'd like to be remembered as one who worked to free those whose minds enslaved them, and as a person who challenged the notion that variables that we used to consider to be stable and unchanging, like IQ and autism, aren't really as unchanging as many had thought them to be." Lovaas worked alongside Don Baer, Montrose Wolfe, Sid Bijou, Todd Risley, and James Sherman in establishing behavior modification at the University of Washington.
Bethany then goes on to explain how a 1987 study by Lovaas titled Behavioral Treatment and Normal Education and Intellectual Functioning in Young Autistic Children acted as the cornerstone for ABA as we know it today. ABA relies on psychologically conditioning autistic children, punishing them for displaying neurodivergent behaviors and rewarding them for displaying neurotypical ones, trying to force them to adhere to the confines of neurotypical society. The methods of punishment range from verbal abuse all the way up to shock aversion therapy. That's when you come to discover that Lovaas has a very similar paper to his 1987 one titled Behavioral Treatment of Deviant Sex Role Behaviors in a Male Child, which was published in 1974, a decade prior his paper that laid the foundation for ABA. The 1974 paper centers on one child, a 4-year-old boy who was brought to them due to displaying signs of feminine behavior, what were taken to be signs that the child was becoming gay or trans. Lovaas and his colleague George Raker abused the child into hiding any such behavior before presenting him as a success story. The reality is, Lovaas and Raker had inflicted acute psychological trauma that continued to fester as the child grew up. At least it did, until he took his own life. His suicide was linked directly to Lovaas's treatment. ABA and reparative torture are not similar by coincidence. One is copied directly from the other, with both using psychological conditioning to try and torture what are perceived as bad behaviors out of children. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic through my usage of the word torture here, please consider how Bethany refers to the almost identical methods of ABA herself.
Forget that the person is a human being with a mind, with emotions, and a psyche that might be affected by torture. As long as it works, it's fine. And it's ethical, because the ends justify the means. And even if it's not using electric shocks in your area, ABA is getting worse, not better, in its attempts to control, manipulate, and change autistic people.
So by Bethany's own standards, my response wasn't hyperbole, and it most certainly wasn't slander. Of course, admitting that would require Bethany to not only own up to her own actions, it would require her to be consistent in her beliefs. And once we have knowledge of all this, we begin to see statements like these in a new light.
I never went after you and said, you know, this is how I feel about you or whatever. But yeah, everyone interpreted it that way, right? Like, as if I was coming to you and saying, like, I think you're awful. And never in a million years would I do that to you. There are so many people in my life that I love and care about who belong to that community. I don't have any bad feelings towards you. I don't have any ill will towards you. I don't want to hurt you or come after you or anything. I care about you. I love you. I value you. You are worth being here. You are God's creation, LGBTQ plus or not. God has made you to be here. You are important and worthy, and you deserve to be here.
Bethany promoted the pseudoscientific belief that is used to justify the torture of queer people who can't defend themselves. It does not matter whether she was talking to her fellow homophobic Christians or if she was addressing the LGBT+ community. She was justifying the torture of our most vulnerable members, a fact I will not be silent on. The rest is nothing more than hollow words designed to numb queer folk to the fact that she was stabbing us in the back. I mean, applying her own logic here for a second, Autism Speaks almost never addresses the autistic community. They instead try to convince holistic people that we can and should be saved, that we should be cured. Does that mean Bethany can't critique Autism Speaks for their bullshit since they never came after her by her own reasoning? Hell no. But she refuses to accept responsibility for her actions. Instead, she pretends as if she's a victim of some vast conspiracy against her.
I've never started anything with anyone in this community. It's just not how I roll. However, apparently, from my understanding, all of this type of stuff started because I made a video when I was sick about how I personally was okay with the puzzle piece for autism, and apparently that was not okay for a lot of people, and basically everything went down from there. So I took this video down after some people had gotten a hold of it. Of course, they were looking for things to basically come at me over. So like for me, there were very specific people who basically like conspired to make sure that that video happened. The slanderous video that I mentioned, they said that if I wasn't such a bee, that they wouldn't do this to me. So like they knew that what they were doing and the way they were going about things was wrong, but it was okay because they perceived me as a terrible person, so it's fine, right?
Starting with the whole puzzle piece thing, I have no idea what she's talking about. At the time, I didn't even know about her support for the puzzle piece. I only became aware of the issue after I published my video, since someone commented about it, which I quickly forgot about until she mentioned it here. Though it does kind of make me wonder if Bethany has read the comments on my video and decided she can use them to invent a story. As for these specific people, I'd like names, since if they're not Levi from A Levi Called Bird, my editor, who is also a queer autistic man and thus has a stake in all this, they had no impact on my production whatsoever. And in regards to Levi, I was the one who informed him, as you can see in the screenshot from the 10th of April, 2020. You can also see me talk about my reasoning for going to her channel, how I wasn't looking for stuff to pull apart. I saw she had a religious channel and she talked about LGBT+ folk. I am LGBT+, therefore I decided to click on it as it related to me as a person. I was not looking for trouble. I was actually intending to give her a shout out at that point in time. But none of those facts matter, at least not to Bethany. All she has to do is assert that there's some sort of LGBT+ conspiracy out to get her, and the majority of her followers will believe her due to the trust she's built with them, the very same trust she's now exploiting. It's also worth mentioning that the notion that there's an LGBT+ conspiracy that's out to hurt a white cis woman also reeks of white supremacy and carries some pretty anti-Semitic undertones, as most conspiracy theories sadly do. The idea of the gay cabal is an old one, dating all the way back to Nazi Germany, and it's a very familiar tune by this point. As for calling Bethany a bitch, I don't recall doing that. All I recall saying to her was, quote, "Turns out I've been a neurolurker for all my life. Something working on my recent Autism Acceptance Month video brought to light. Just uploaded my next video to publish later today," end quote, before she went ahead and blocked me, a fact discussed in my follow-up video regarding Neuroclastic. Don't worry, we'll get to them in a bit. Fact is, even if I had called Bethany a bitch for supporting the torture of queer folk, that would have been completely reasonable. Like, surely we can see just how fucked up it is to prioritize being called a bitch over the literal torture of queer youth. But why am I surprised? As we'll see towards the end of this video, Bethany is also the person who acted as if being called a bastard was on par with the murder of black people. But Bethany's not quite done presenting me as this hyper-aggressive monster who is simply out for blood. Oh no. We also have the way in which she pretends like I was out there, attacking her friends.
During our conversation, it was made apparent that my mental state was very poor. And because of that, someone tried to convince that person not to come after me specifically, but sure, like rip apart my belief and rip apart like the arguments made there, rip that apart, but don't rip apart me. And for doing that, they got dragged and they got called all sorts of things. And that's what makes me so upset. Like, I'm afraid because people around me get hurt for treating me like a decent person. But that's like the reality of things, right? If I collaborate with somebody, that doesn't mean I co-sign everything they ever said or did or believe. I've worked with tons of people I don't agree with on a lot of things, but that's okay because we wanted to work on a project on autism. Like, I don't understand why people think like if you ever do anything with someone, or if you're friends with someone, that you agree with everything they say and do, and they should be like ruined for being friends with someone you don't like or who did something you don't think is okay. I don't understand that, because that's just not how reality works.
Regarding the notion that you can't be judged for having friends with different opinions, this is a sentiment that refers to things such as a taste in music, not disagreement on whether a certain group of people deserves to be tortured or not. If you're friends with someone who says queer youth should be tortured into being allo-cis het, that tells me violence aimed towards my community is something you are okay with, marking you as someone who is not safe to be around. The fact that Bethany doesn't have to worry about which people want her dead versus which people don't is her privilege on display. It tells me that she's never been in the situation where someone describes in graphic detail how they want to hurt her or her loved ones, and she's expected to smile and say nothing. I have. And I'll be 6 foot under before I let someone tell me it's unreasonable to call that out. However, she's not only wrong in a general sense, she's also lying about me coming after people. The person she's talking about is an organisation, Neuroclastic. What's more is, I didn't attack them. When I saw the organisation commenting on and sharing Bethany's post via their official Twitter account, I reached out quietly and informed them about her homophobia, assuming they simply did not know. A couple hours later, Neuroclastic came out of nowhere publicly and tried to get me to self-censor, resorting to ableism as a means to defend Bethany's homophobia, literally telling me that she was off limits because she was autistic and thus lacked autonomy. Great autism advocacy there. Shockingly, they didn't extend that same mislogic to me, the autistic queer person, when they began threatening me with a SLAP suit for documenting their shitty behaviour. SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. It's when a person or organisation, such as Neuroclastic, uses the threat of defamation lawsuit to silence critique. This is done since, regardless of whether the person is right or not, the costs of a defamation lawsuit mean that most people cannot afford to go through that process and defend themselves, ensuring things never actually reach the court. Hell, Neuroclastic went so far as to stress this very point in the final line of their threat. Neuroclastic is very aware of the fact that they are using legal violence to silence LGBT+ autistic folk. But wait a second, my video is still up, so what happened? Thankfully, I have something a lot of queer autistic folk don't have. My wife, who's a former practicing lawyer that now works predominantly in human rights fields relating to domestic abuse and child marriage in India. She also acts as my legal advisor during the many times I've been threatened by transphobes and homophobes such as Graham Linehan. We actually raised more than $2,000 to fight Graham in court before he backed down. Money that Essence of Thought has kept a hold of since the same thing keeps happening again and again. And I am more than happy to grab this unicorn by the horn and ride it straight into hell out of sheer spite if it comes down to that. Well, my wife took one look at the document Neuroclastic sent me and laughed, telling me that there was no way in hell that they'd had any legally competent individual look over what they'd written. How could she tell? Well, for a start, there's the legally non-binding declaration that Neuroclastic does not consent to their legal threat being made public. When they approached me about this, I had already explicitly told them not to contact me unless they were willing to accept responsibility for their actions. I had a history of documenting their defense of homophobia. They had absolutely no reason to expect any degree of privacy from me at that point. So unless I've signed a non-disclosure agreement or I'm in a role of confidentiality, I have every legal right to share whatever they send me. Second, they shot themselves in the foot in regards to any case they might have had if they later changed their mind, since this formal document sent to me by them is clearly attempting to revise events as they occurred. Take for example this line found at the start of point 3 in which they state, quote, "Responding to a tweet with a single word to someone about whom I knew nothing about at the time is not associating with someone," end quote. Again, the actual issue was them coming after me to try and get me to self-censor, but what's important here is the claim that Bethany was just, quote, "someone about whom I knew nothing about at the time," end quote. Take that line and compare it to this message sent to me via the official No Classic Twitter account on the 2nd of May 2019, which states, quote, "I thought she was like 21/22. I do know details about her as I have a friend who has been working trying to help her," end quote. So they did have prior knowledge of Bethany's homophobia. This is why you always hire a lawyer if you think something could ever go to court, because stuff like this can be used to destroy credibility since it shows clear intent to misrepresent the facts. Now, I've gone ahead and made a copy of the document No Classic sent me, the one in which they threatened me, as well as our conversation about having the video removed, both of which can be accessed via the reference list found in the transcript links below. You have my permission to use these resources however you will. Point is, whilst Bethany is trying to frame me as this monster who was just out there attacking her friends, the reality is she had an entire organization in her corner who tried to legally extort me into hiding their connections to her mess. Because all of this is just another lie designed to paint herself as the poor victim of the cruel, unfeeling LGBT+ folk. Because much like the narrative of Christian persecution, the idea of the marginalized monster is a powerful one. That's what this whole show has been about. The crying, the claims of being attacked, the idea that the people criticizing Bethany are part of some organized conspiracy. All of this is forwarded by her in an attempt to frame LGBT+ folk, those of us fighting to protect our most vulnerable, as evil monsters out for her blood. This is especially potent considering the fact that I, Bethany's main critic in relation to this issue, am a trans femme person. The far right, including the Christian right in the US, has spent the last few years telling everyone that my one goal in life is to break into bathroom stalls and rape white cis women. So when she makes this argument, when she lies, when she frames entirely justifiable criticism as an affront to her as a human being, that feeds into the narrative that trans femme folk and LGBT+ folk in general are predatory. She's fueling the fires of queerphobia with her white cis tears, exploiting them. Something she's very good at, as we'll see in a bit. But the main takeaway here is the fact that she's not done trying to hurt LGBT+ folk. If she were, she wouldn't be lying to fuel stereotypes in an attempt to get others to enact violence for her. And you might say that she told people that she doesn't want them to go out there and target her critics, but that's the twisted beauty of the system. She retains perfect deniability for her actions. She never said go after people like me. All she did was paint us as monsters. Video after video after video. That's why I can't take the few times she says sorry, like these sections, seriously.
So a lot of people were expressing that they were hurt by that video, and for those of you that I did hurt, I am sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to hurt anyone. That was not even the point in a million years of that video, and I wish I could have a better personal relationship with you guys sometimes. But I guess if you are honestly interested in knowing who I am honestly, then I really truly am sorry for hurting you, because again, that was never my intention. Because if you knew me, then you would know that never in a million years would I ever mean to hurt you. But of course, some random person on the other side of a camera on the internet can say whatever, right?
An actual apology requires you to first admit the full extent of what you have done. It requires you to center your own actions, and it requires that you abstain from such behavior in future. Bethany has failed on all three accounts. She refuses to admit what she did. She spends her video lying about her critics, and she does so in a manner that feeds the very same prejudice she's asserting she doesn't have. This isn't an actual apology, this is emotional manipulation. Everything about Stephanie Bethany reads as false, opportunistic, and manipulative. I called it the soft form of bigotry in my original response. The sort of bigotry delivered with a sickening smile that claims to love you, whilst they claw at your flesh. And personally, I think it's infinitely more harmful than direct bigotry. I would rather take 1,000 queerphobes screaming slurs at me and throwing stones over one white cis woman weaponizing her tears, professing to care about us, all whilst propagating narratives used to justify violence against us. And yet, it gets worse. For you see, Bethany's mention of cancel culture and her racism there got me wondering about her thoughts regarding black people in general. That's when I noticed it, a Black Lives Matter video on her Christian channel. Curiosity got the better of me and, well, I'll let Bethany speak for herself.
We talk about this in our church as this is a sign of surrender to God. This is also the sign we give, right, to police to say don't shoot. Our hands should be lifted to praise God and say I give you everything. It shouldn't be on the other side of a weapon, of individuals who are paid to protect innocent people. This shouldn't have to be the position of an innocent person.
Who's this we Bethany is talking about? She's a white cis woman acting as if she's the victim of police violence on camera in order to exploit Black Lives Matter for her own personal gain, drowning out black people's voices in the process. She's not being racially profiled by police, she is the person they claim to be racially profiling on behalf of. Nothing has fueled anti-black violence quite like the tears of white cis women. And the video doesn't get better from there. Bethany is not here to talk about the history or social violence that necessitated Black Lives Matter. Instead, she's here to assert that racism against black people is a spiritual issue that can only be resolved if everyone becomes a Christian.
You can't tell me that what happened to George Floyd isn't demonic. I know that I know that I know our God is a healer, that I know He is a redeemer, that I know that He is good. I know that He is the only one who can ever truly make us free because no government can tell us what our rights are. Our rights are given by God. Unity under the Holy Spirit to let God do what only God can do. Church, judge rightly, repent, and stand up against the devil and the wickedness and evil that is racism.
This is fucked up for so many reasons. For a start, the claim that racism is a spiritual issue separates the problem from the history of white-led violence, making it an abstract problem caused by sin rather than people. Stephanie Bethany is also framing Christianity as if it were oppositional to racism, when the reality is Christianity has been one of the primary tools used by white colonialists to eradicate indigenous cultures worldwide. To this day, it remains one of the most destructive colonial forces. Missionaries invade people's homes, demonize their cultures, spread diseases to isolated groups, and extract way more resources than they ever bring to the countries they claim to be helping. Yet in the specific context of black people in the US, religious ministers use the Bible and its teachings to indoctrinate black slaves into a more passive state. The religious instruction of the Negroes in the United States is just one example of this, being an 1832 sermon given to white plantation owners by Reverend Carl Colcock Jones that instructed them on how they could use Christianity as a means of preventing slave uprising. The sermon was a big hit, being transcribed and published multiple times in the following decades as Christianity became the #1 strategy to uphold white supremacy's cultural hegemony across the US. This is sadly a big part of the reason why there is such a strong Christian sentiment throughout much of Black America, particularly in the South, and there are various thoughts as to why it was so effective. One idea is the concept of divine justice makes real-world injustice more tolerable. That is, if you believe the people who have hurt you will be punished by a divine entity, you're more likely to stick it out rather than seek justice yourself. In this, religion becomes a sort of distraction, a means to dull the pain, an opium of the masses, as social theorist Karl Marx put it. We can actually see this in action in the New Testament, with books such as Ephesians chapter 6 verses 5 through 8 reading as follows, quote, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them, not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they be slave or free." End quote. This message is so central to the New Testament that it is then repeated almost word for word in Colossians chapter 3 verses 22 through 25. Yet regardless of the reason, it's disgusting for Bethany to try and erase Christianity's part in upholding white supremacy, both in the US and globally. Because whilst I have nothing to say about black Christians in America, that's not my place to comment on, it's important to note the fact that Bethany is going after non-believers here, which includes black non-believers. She's ordering black Muslims, atheists, etc. to fall in line or face racist violence, echoing the plantation owners of the past. And a big part of this is misrepresenting race relations in the US.
We must come to God with the things that have hurt us and let him heal things that only he can heal, because time sure hasn't done it.
Time hasn't healed the hurt caused by racism in America because racism in America is not over. You can't heal a stab wound whilst the knife is still in your back. Discrimination against black people didn't end with the civil rights movement, and it certainly didn't end with the restriction of slavery. I mean, I'm having to qualify it as restriction and not abolition, since slavery is still ongoing in the US. It's just part of the prison system, which is why black communities are targeted and terrorized by police to ensure white business owners have a source of free labor. This isn't a broken system. This is a system working as intended. That's why US police were formed in the first place, to catch escaped slaves. Now they hunt for excuses to turn the formerly free into slaves. Another problem with the whole divine will narrative is that it makes it very easy for white Christians to brush their hands of the issue. And I know that Bethany says that acknowledging that it's a faith problem doesn't absolve them of responsibility, but the fact is, she doesn't explain in any way what that responsibility is. In fact, the only time she mentions any sort of tangible action is when she goes out of her way to shoot down what black voices are crying out for.
For me, I don't see it as reasonable to completely abolish the police system. I also do not believe that all cops are bad, or other words that saying or that acronym may mean.
Black people are dying, yet it's the word bastard that makes her more uncomfortable. Having watched the rest of Bethany's video, it seems like she genuinely believes the solution to be prayer and proselytizing, the former of which is completely useless and the latter of which is actively harmful in this specific context. Which I guess goes to confirm the fact that this video was never about tackling racism. It was all about policing black voices whilst using their suffering to proselytize and promote herself. The final problem I like to raise with the notion of divine will is the way in which white nationalists use the exact same rhetoric to argue that it's God's will that black people should be subjugated. This is a very common argument made by the Christian right. They did a similar thing regarding the Christian-caused HIV pandemic, which was presented as a sign of God's wrath against queer people. In short, it's used to blame the victims of racism. I mean, even Bethany is making that argument to a degree in claiming that people, including black people, just don't have enough faith. They don't worship her God enough. Therefore, racism happens and will continue to happen until that changes. And she might try arguing that she's referring to white people not having enough faith, but my question then is as follows. Why should black people be made to suffer for the failings of white people. Where's the divine justice in that? Of course, not satisfied with one form of violence, Bethany partakes in the white cultural pastime of gaslighting black people by casting their uprising after centuries of them being enslaved, murdered, robbed, and worse by white society, as being on par with the systems that enact said violence.
There are situations of violence and wrongdoing on both the parts of citizens and police.
And if you're wondering whether this is just a once-off, it isn't, as seen in this clip from her Cult of Social Justice video.
I talked to you not too long ago about the issue of Black Lives Matter. Let me make it clear that I don't agree with the movement as a whole. I don't agree with the concept of hating police, hating all these people, tearing things down, being destructive, and a lot of the things that also kind of get melded into the movement itself.
According to Bethany, black people aren't even allowed to hate the bastards, turning their communities into literal war zones in a desperate bid to defend their privilege to execute black people on the spot without reprisal. And just so we're absolutely clear, burning down and looting chain stores is completely moral, considering that the very people who own these places have stolen infinitely more from black people than black people could ever take back. Not just through modern day slavery and lynchings, but also wage theft. So yeah, Bethany has a lot of issues besides homophobia and transphobia, and I would have felt remiss leaving this out after I became aware of just how bad things are. The fact is, Bethany needs to stop trying to lie her way out of this. She either needs to change who she is, or accept the fact that she's a bigot comfortable in her bigotry who is lashing out at the people calling her out on it, when the only one responsible for how she acts is herself. But yeah, hopefully this video helped you learn something. I know it was exhausting. Believe me, compiling all of this information was hell. And if it did help you, please be sure to leave a like and a comment. I always read every single one and try to respond to as many as possible. If you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Garrett Van Voorst, Cthulhu, and Flynn. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.